Constantinople around the year 1100 emerges as a city forged from ambition and memory, where domes, walls, and ancient roads still bear the traces of countless generations that have passed through. From the vantage point of the Theodosian walls, the entire capital stretches out with marble blocks, metallic domes, and streets winding along the terrain of 7 hills, a landscape both majestic and impossible to fully grasp in one view. The Golden Horn lies to the north, once the convergence point for merchant ships, caravans, and people arriving from distant lands, while the great avenues leading into the center reveal the structure of a city that has endured for many centuries. In this journey, I use visual reconstructions and AI to bring us closer to that past, allowing us to see Constantinople not only through documents but in the very space where it once existed. Constantinople in the year 1100 stands as one of the most extraordinary cities. From any perspective, geographical, political, or economic, it carries a distinct identity, as if the fate of the entire Mediterranean and Near East region revolved around every harbor and every rooftop of this city. At a time when Emperor Alexios I Komnenos was consolidating power after prolonged upheavals, Constantinople appears as a proud yet vigilant metropolis, where the terrain and the sea seem arranged to serve an empire determined to outlast any enemy. The city sits precisely at the intersection of 2 continents, where the Bosphorus Strait connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and what makes Constantinople truly exceptional is not just its location, but the way it compels every trade route from Rus, Armenia, Persia, Syria, Egypt, Venice, or Genoa to converge on the Golden Horn. In 1100, no city in Europe could match the level of connectivity that Constantinople possessed, and it is hard not to be captivated by the invisible allure created by this geographical position. Everything visible in the city traces back to Constantine's decision in 330, when he chose this site to build the new Rome, 7 hills forming a strategic terrain framework, 3 sides surrounded by sea as a natural shield, and the Golden Horn, a rare deep-water bay, allowing the city to become the largest port in the region. Immediately following that location, the Theodosian walls played the role of turning Constantinople in 1100 into a fortress that was almost impregnable. 3 layers of walls ran along the western side, constructed from the early 5th century, still maintaining impressive defensive capabilities. The outer wall for patrols, the middle wall for enhanced firepower, and the inner wall so thick that even the most powerful siege engines struggled to approach it. Surviving records show that when sections were damaged, repairs happened immediately, like a reflex of a community accustomed to living under constant pressure. From the 7th to the 11th century, that pressure never eased. Avars and Slavs, Arabs and Rus took turns testing the city, leaving on its walls the marks of relentless efforts to keep Constantinople standing. The Varangian Guard, the northern bodyguard, emerged as another symbol of that resilience. Clad in heavy armor and wielding long axes, they are recorded as the most loyal shield of the imperial family at the city's critical points. Yet the geography of Constantinople did not merely create a fortress, it created an economic center so vibrant that it became the very soul of the empire. The Golden Horn in 1100 is described as a place of ceaseless transport and commerce. Ships from Italy, Armenia, Rus or Persia brought silk, timber, spices and metals to the docks. The sound of shipbuilders' hammers mingled with merchants calling to one another, the smell of pitch blending with sea breezes, forming an unforgettable symphony. What was special was not just the scale of trade, but its continuity through major upheavals, a testament to the city's adaptability. To the south, the Sea of Marmara provided a natural defensive line, and the coastal walls prevented landing attempts. The climate, carrying heat from Anatolia and cold winds from the Balkans, shaped a familiar rhythm of life that residents had accepted across generations. The 7-hill terrain continued to define the inner city's structure. Steep, winding roads curved around churches, monasteries, and residential areas, creating a terraced city where each architectural layer represented a layer of time. Of date very vitrefana, oikrogli ontubortis, unfamrids wans fams zapamtal non-pilgrims met. Nowhere else displayed the intersection of religion, commerce, and politics as clearly as here. In the late 11th century, as Crusader armies passed through the city, Constantinople once again faced new pressures. The court had to tighten control over the gates, coordinate food supplies, and monitor commercial activities. From the geographical foundation and defensive lines that made Constantinople a resilient fortress in 1100, stepping inside the city opens another story. The story of an urban center that had created its own rhythm of life over centuries, a rhythm I always imagine I could touch if time could be reversed. The Odos, formed from the late 4th century and still central in the early 12th century, is where the cultural blending of the entire Mediterranean region appears most vividly in surviving records. Documents describe merchants from Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, commercial powers that rose strongly after the 11th century, frequently present along this route, bringing textiles, glass, and wine. Armenians and Syrians, settled there earlier, displayed silk, dyes, and gems, while Rus merchants, continuing a trade tradition from the 9th century, brought furs, beeswax, and intricately carved heavy silverware. All these descriptions evoke a sense of chaotic yet vibrant energy, as if the city was always open to anyone with something to exchange or something to seek. Behind those layers of commerce lay the natural dependence of Constantinople on produce from the outskirts, a detail often overlooked in histories but consistently appearing in tax records and administrative documents. Vegetables, grain, bread, honey, these humble items contributed to the stability of a city whose pace of life always exceeded its capacity for self-sufficiency. Perhaps that is why, when reading those sources, I always feel that Constantinople was strong, not just because of its merchant fleets, but because of thousands of small lives flowing together into one great current. Moving along the Maze, the Forum of Constantine appears in the sources as a dense administrative and commercial space filled with people. Here, edicts were proclaimed, adjustments to trade taxes were issued, and Armenian goldsmiths or Syrian weavers set up stalls next to Italian merchants, making this square a true cultural crossroads. Yet many records frankly describe the darker side of the area: crowding, garbage, pickpocketing, and times when the road became nearly impassable. It is precisely this imperfection that makes the portrait of Constantinople feel more real, not an idealized capital, but a living, complex, and sometimes overwhelmed metropolis weighed down by its own magnitude. Farther west, the Forum of Theodosius emerges with a clearer commercial role. Glazed green pottery, multicolored glassware, and bags of spices from the east appear repeatedly in contemporary descriptions. This area is recounted as both prosperous and stifling, with narrow, dusty streets and an atmosphere sometimes heavy with the sheer density of trade. But it is there that one sees the city's resilience as a living space. Beautiful, noisy, lacking order, yet irreplaceable. Alongside the markets were public baths maintained since Roman times, along with monasteries sprouting on the slopes from the 9th century onward. Records of the sound of water, the scent of perfumes, the steam and the monastery bells make Constantinople appear both bustling and serene in a very distinctive way. Residential areas are described with images of multi-story wooden houses, narrow alleys, small balconies, where the risks of fire, disease and traffic jams were ever present. The city did not hide those inconveniences. It lived with them, as if those flaws had become part of its urban soul. And when descriptions turn the gaze eastward, the dome of Hagia Sophia, standing there since the 6th century, appears as the culmination of every movement the city generated. Pilgrims' accounts describe light reflecting off mosaic gold, marble, and a space so resonant that prayers seem to dissolve into the air. That is the moment when Constantinople steps beyond the bounds of a commercial or political city, becoming a place where religion, power, and memory merge into an experience I have always longed to witness firsthand. From the Odos, where the rhythm of Constantinople reveals itself in all its prosperity and chaos, stepping deeper into the city around the year 1100 means entering spaces where power, faith, and conflict intertwine in a way few other cities could replicate. And nowhere illustrates this more clearly than Hagia Sophia, the destination toward which every road in the city seems to lead. Completed in 537 and still the spiritual center in the early 12th century, this structure is often described not merely as a church, but as the beating heart of Constantinople. Komnenian-era records describe light from the windows encircling the main dome, pouring down onto golden mosaic panels, making the space seem to move with every flicker of candlelight or sunlight, and many pilgrims record an overwhelming sensation upon crossing the threshold, as if the city had poured all its sacredness and every memory of the empire into a single space. From Hagia Sophia, just a short distance to the southeast, lies the Great Palace, the ceremonial and political center of the court, where Alexios I Komnenos restored imperial prestige after years of instability. Many sources describe the Chrysotriklinos, the octagonal ceremonial hall, as the heart of government activity, where ambassadors were received and imperial regalia displayed the splendor the empire wished to project outward. Yet behind that magnificence are records of decay in some areas following military and financial crises, reminding us that power in Constantinople also had moments of fragility, and the palace was not only a symbol of stability, but a trace of recovery efforts. Farther west, the Hippodrome emerges as another world, a space where politics, entertainment, and society blended in a tension that never disappeared. Since Constantine's time, it had been the stage for chariot races and public ceremonies, but in the 11th-12th centuries, it was also where the blue and green factions expressed their influence as real social forces. Chronicles recount instances when crowds erupted into riots, sometimes shaking the entire political order, showing that Constantinople faced pressure not only from external enemies, but from its own internal dynamics. Along the Spina axis, between the Egyptian obelisk and Roman bronze statues, one can easily see how the city used heritage to reinforce its present identity, while simultaneously exposing internal fractures through arguments, cheers, and clashes. Many texts from the period describe the Hippodrome as crowded, noisy, and sometimes dangerous, an image contrasting with the solemnity of Hagia Sophia, yet perfectly complementing the portrait of Constantinople, glorious, yet always teetering on the edge of chaos. When viewing the entire space, Hagia Sophia with its sanctity, the Great Palace with its ceremonial authority, and the Hippodrome with its unpredictable social waves, it is not hard to understand why Constantinople, in 1100, left such a powerful impression. This was a place where power and everyday life, religion and politics, faith and discontent, all coexisted, and sometimes I think that if I could live in the city's past for just one day, it would be in this very area, where those collisions took place, that I would want to linger the longest, because there, Constantinople appears not merely as a capital, but as an irreplaceable world. Leaving the Hippodrome and the echoes of power, conflicts still lingering in ancient records, Constantinople emerges as a city that has lived very long with its own history, absorbing every loss and then regenerating in a way few other cities could achieve. Each architectural layer, each residential quarter, each marketplace tells a part of the journey the city has gone through. A journey that was never straight, always interspersed between collapse and recovery, yet strangely still moving forward with an inexplicable steadfastness. After the time of Justinian, major upheavals once caused Constantinople to weaken severely. The city lost many residents, many areas were abandoned, and once glorious structures became cracked and broken due to lack of care. Yet what makes Constantinople astonishing is the way it refused to retreat. Broken walls were rebuilt, damaged aqueducts were cleared, and empty residential areas were gradually filled by people from surrounding regions. Traces of decline remained, but new layers of activity appeared on top, as if the city was determined not to let time take away everything that belonged to it. Through attacks spanning generations, Constantinople learned to adapt to external pressure with a special kind of survival resilience. Residential areas near the walls were reorganized to counter risks of fire or bombardment. Roads were widened or rerouted to support the transport of food and military supplies, and many new residential zones formed after each period of upheaval. That restructuring was not only defensive, but also adaptive. Residents did not simply restore what was lost, but rearranged urban space according to new needs. When Constantinople entered a more stable phase, the city once again proved that it survived not just because of its walls, but because of its ability to reorganize itself as a living entity. Inner city markets expanded, monasteries added new buildings, and many workshops formed near the harbors to serve the growing volume of goods. What is interesting is that while many European cities of that time still had fragmented structures, Constantinople developed according to a multi-centered model. Some areas belonged to administration, some to religion, some to commerce, but all were bound together by the ceaseless movement of its residents. In the surviving records, that urban picture sometimes appears imperfect, overcrowded areas breeding disease, overloaded roads, unsanitary residential quarters, but it is precisely that imperfection that makes the city feel more real, an urban center never still, always colliding between old and new, rich and poor, order and chaos. Alongside inner city life came changes in the structure of power. The court gradually shifted its presence from the Great Palace to Blakeney in the northwest corner of the city, bringing with it the development of a new political center. This shift did not just change the shape of the court, but also the distribution of residents, workshops and small markets surrounding it. Roads leading to Blakeney were widened, houses were built anew, and many ceremonial activities moved to this area, turning what was once a quiet suburban region into a new bustling hub. Meanwhile, the area along the Golden Horn witnessed the clear growth of shipyards. Records describe the sound of hammers striking wood, the smell of hot pitch, and ship frames rising densely along the waterfront. Warships, transport vessels, and foreign merchant ships were all repaired or built here. That created a steady stream of work for craftsmen, but it also made the harbour shore noisy and chaotic. Not a few chronicles mention that this area was prone to fires, disorder, or even violence due to economic conflicts between local residents and foreign merchants. The increasingly strong presence of Italian merchants, especially from Venice and Genoa, also changed the city in ways that sometimes made native residents uneasy. They brought new goods, techniques, and capital, helping to boost trade, but their tax exemptions or priority docking rights caused many Constantinople residents to worry about losing economic control. These tensions, though not erupting immediately, would gradually become a factor, reshaping the city's political and economic landscape later on. However, when looking at the whole picture, it is hard not to feel that all those shifts, major restructurings, minor upheavals, overlapping conflicts, were signs of a truly living city. Constantinople was never just a city of stone and walls. It was like a complex organism with strong parts, weak parts, regenerating parts, and weary parts. Its resilience did not come from intactness, but from the ability to endure and change ceaselessly. Stepping out from the imagined Golden Horn docks of Constantinople around the year 1100, it is hard not to think of the shape the city carries in the present. What was once traces of merchant ships, the sound of hammers in shipyards, or competition from foreign merchants, has now turned into different rhythms of life, but the sense of a vibrant commercial hub still lingers somehow in the air of today's Istanbul. That ancient inlet, though now enclosed by bridges, ferry terminals, and modern buildings, still serves as the breathing artery of the city, just as it did centuries ago. When looking at Istanbul, one cannot help but recognize the lingering lines from the time of Constantinople. Even though many ancient structures have vanished, the once cramped and fire-prone residential areas have given way to wider neighborhoods, but the street layout still carries traces of the slopes, turns, and openings that the Byzantines built. The presence of history does not come from how many structures still stand, but from the way the modern city is still guided by the boundaries of the past. Hagia Sophia is the clearest proof of that. This structure, completed in the 6th century, has undergone multiple functional transformations: church, mosque, museum, and then place of worship again. But strangely, each change did not erase the initial sense of its grandeur. When standing in that space today, the light reflecting off marble surfaces and mosaic inlays still evokes something of the feeling that 12th century pilgrims once experienced. Though the city around it has changed, that dome still holds a symbolic weight that time cannot erode. The roads that were once the main trade arteries of Constantinople, such as the stretch connecting the Mesa Odos to the Golden Horn, are now tourist streets where modern crowds follow traces they do not always recognize. Cafes have replaced spice stalls, souvenir shops have taken the place of craftsmen, but the feeling of crowding, sometimes chaotic, sometimes messy, remains similar to the ancient records. The modern city also faces traffic congestion, pollution, even overcrowded neighborhoods. And to some extent, those issues make Istanbul feel closer to the Constantinople of the past. When rereading descriptions from the 11th-12th centuries, I realize that the past has not entirely disappeared. It does not lie in reconstructing every brick, but in the feeling that this city always exists under multiple overlapping layers of time. Some layers have faded, some remain intact, and some exist only in memory and surviving words. But all blend together to create a city that one can sense even without standing in the past. Constantinople was once a city full of pride, full of ambition, full of contradictions, but it is precisely that which made it irreplaceable. Each time I look back, I feel as though I am standing between two worlds, a world that has been lost and a world that continues to live. And sometimes I wish I could step back to the year 1100, to hear the bells from old monasteries, to feel the heat from public baths, to walk among the crowded streets that history has recorded more than once. For now, perhaps visual reconstructions and AI are the closest I can come to that dream. Even so, this journey still opens up the feeling that time is not necessarily a separating wall, but a thin mist, and if one knows where to look, fragments of the old Constantinople can still emerge amid today's Istanbul. If you want to continue joining these journeys of exploring history through reconstructed images, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. See you again on the next voyage through the cities that changed the world.